Clara Watts had $391 in her bank account, a 7-year-old daughter asleep 4 feet away, and a custody hearing in 23 days. Her ex-husband had a $500 an hour lawyer. She had cracked hands, a cracked mug, and a grey uniform with a fraying D. Then a quiet cowboy sat down at the counter and refused to look away. The alarm went off at 4:45 a.m. Clara didn't need it. She hadn't really slept. She lay on the thin mattress of room 7 at the Sundown Motor Lodge and stared at the water stain on the ceiling, the one shaped like a bent hand reaching for nothing, and did what she'd been doing every morning for the past 8 months. She counted 300 nahuls, 44 tons in the savings account, $9. 25 an hour at the diner, rent due in 6 days, 23 days until the custody hearing. 4 feet away, Sophie slept with her knees pulled to her chest, one hand pressed under her cheek, the other still curled around the green crayon she'd fallen asleep coloring with, 7 years old. Brown hair that curled at the ends when the air was humid, which in Harlan, Texas was most mornings. Clara watched her breathe. That's it, she thought. That's everything. Right there. She dressed in the dark, black non-slip shoes with the right heel worn down unevenly, the grey uniform with Sundown Diner embroidered in yellow above the left pocket, the thread on the D coming undone at the bottom, hair back in a rubber band she'd been reusing for 3 weeks. Cold water on her face in the bathroom that smelled of mildew and old pipes. She glanced at herself in the cracked mirror above the sink for exactly 2 seconds. Then she looked away. She'd stopped doing that, really looking. Around the same time, Richard started saying there was nothing worth seeing. Mrs. Holloway at the front desk of the motel was already awake when Clara walked past at 5:10 a.m. She was 71 and claimed she hadn't slept through a night since 1987, a fact she delivered with a kind of proud ownership. "Sophie's still asleep?" she asked. "She'll be fine until 7. I'll call on break." Mrs. Holloway nodded, but her eyes held something careful. "You eat anything this morning?" "I'll eat at the diner." "Clara." "I will, Mrs. Holloway." The older woman let it go. She always did eventually. "Get those tips," she said. "Tips. Last Tuesday, $6.40 for a 6-hour lunch shift. Last Wednesday, $11. Zeros. Thursday, 8. Is 75, but one of those was from a man who'd left exact change and then added $1 in coins he'd found in his jacket pocket, and he'd said, "Here you go, sweetheart," in a way that made her skin crawl, but she'd kept the $1. The Sundown Diner sat at the intersection of Route 9 and Old Mill Road, 3 miles from the motel. Clara walked it. Her 2004 Ford Focus had been making a grinding noise in 3rd gear since November, and she was afraid to find out what it was. Better to walk. Better to save everything she could. She pushed open the side door at 5:22 a.m. The kitchen smelled like bacon grease and floor cleaner, a combination that had once made her nauseous and now just smelled like Tuesday. Donna was already refilling the napkin dispensers at the counter, not looking up. "You're late," she said. "By 2 minutes. 2 minutes is 2 minutes." Donna finally looked up. She was 58, compact and precise, with a voice like a screen door in a windstorm. Not mean, just exact. "Table 4 wants decaf. 3rd time they've asked." "I'll get it." Clara tied her apron, grabbed the pot, and moved. She filled the man's cup at table 4. Late 60s, hearing aid, crossword folded to Tuesday, without asking, and he nodded without looking up. This was her world, invisible and useful, exactly how Richard had always wanted her. By 6 a.m. And the first rush hit. Truckers off the highway, 3 ranchers, a couple from the motel passing through to El Paso, who asked for separate checks and then argued about them anyway. Clara moved between tables on autopilot, coffee to booth 3, eggs to the counter, check to the window. She was wiping down the far end of the counter when the bell above the door rang at 6:15 a.m. She didn't look up right away. "Morning, Donna," said a voice. Low and unhurried, the kind of voice that had never been in a rush a day in its life. "Jake." Donna's voice warmed by about 15 degrees. "Usual? Please." Clara turned to grab the coffee pot and stopped. He was at the far end of the counter, tall, maybe 6'2", in a flannel shirt the color of pine bark, worn through at both elbows. Boots that had seen actual mud, not the decorative kind. A face that had been lived in, not old but weathered, mid-40s maybe, with a jaw that hadn't seen a razor in 4 or 5 days, and deep lines at the corners of his eyes from squinting against a lot of sun. His hat was in his hands, and he turned it slowly by the brim, a gesture so habitual he probably didn't know he was doing it. He looked around the diner the way someone does when they're checking a room, and then his eyes landed on Clara. She looked away first. She wasn't sure why. She poured a coffee for booth 6 and kept moving. At 6:45 a.m., her phone buzzed in her apron pocket. Richard. She stepped into the narrow hallway beside the restrooms and picked up on the 3rd ring. "I need you to sign the voluntary relinquishment paperwork." No greeting. He never used greetings anymore. "Stephanie found a filing that could make things significantly worse for you in front of Judge Callahan." Stephanie, his attorney. $500 an hour, according to the certified letter she'd received 3 weeks ago. "I'm at work," Clara said. "This would save you the humiliation of the hearing." "I said I'm at work, Clara." He used the patient tone, the measured, careful one that sounded calm, but meant he was about to take something apart. "You're living in a motor lodge. You drive a car that barely runs. You make what, $9, $10 an hour? You can't give Sophie a real life. I can. This isn't about punishing you. This is about what's best for—" She hung up. Her hands were shaking. She pressed them flat against the textured wall, the plaster cold and rough against her palms. She stood there with her eyes closed and counted backward from 10, 8, 7, 6. Her grandmother had taught her this, back when things were hard in different ways, in a different kitchen, a long time ago. 5, 4, 3. She straightened up, smoothed her apron, and walked back out to the floor. She was not going to cry in the hallway of the sundown diner. She'd decided that a long time ago. Donna noticed. Donna always noticed. "You okay?" "Fine," Clara said. "Your hands are shaking." "I'm fine, Donna." A long look. Then Donna refilled the coffee near the register and went back to work. It was the kindest thing she could have done. Clara moved to clear the counter and found herself standing 2 feet from the man in the flannel shirt. Up close, the lines at his eyes were deeper than she'd thought. He had his coffee in both hands and was looking at the window, not at her. She reached for his empty plate. "You don't have to," he said, still not looking at her. "I'm not done with the coffee. I wasn't taking the coffee." "I know." A beat of quiet. "You cleared the Harrisons' table," he said, still to the window. "They left you $2, $50 on a $34 ticket." She blinked. She hadn't realized anyone had noticed. "That happens," she said. "Doesn't make it right." She didn't answer. She took her hand off his plate and moved to the next table, but she felt his eyes follow her for a moment, not invasively, in the way of someone paying attention, which was somehow stranger and more unsettling than anything else. At 10:30 a.m., her manager called her to the back. Greg Sutton was 47, managed the diner, and had the interpersonal warmth of a parking ticket. He sat behind his desk with his hands folded and looked at her the way someone looks at a column of numbers that don't add up. "You're at 28 hours this week," he said. "I know. I'm available for the closing shift Thursday and Friday. I'm giving those to Marcy. She's got seniority." Clara felt the floor shift slightly under her feet. "Greg, I need the hours." "Everybody needs the hours. I have a custody hearing in—" "Clara." Her name, the way someone says stop. "This isn't about your personal situation. That's how scheduling works." She stood very still. Through his narrow window, the morning sky was pale and flat and empty. "Can I take the Friday lunch shift instead?" "I'll see. I need to know." "I said I'll see." He picked up his phone. She walked back out to the floor. The man in the flannel shirt had left. On the counter, where his coffee cup had been, there was a neatly folded $20 bill. No receipt, no note. Clara stood there and looked at it. She picked it up, folded it once, and put it in her apron pocket next to the $2, $50. Through the window, she caught the tail end of a dark green pickup pulling out of the lot. Just the outline of broad shoulders and a hat. She watched until the truck turned onto Route 9 and disappeared. She called Sophie at 9:02 a.m. on her break, sitting on the concrete step behind the diner where the delivery trucks came. "Mom!" Sophie's voice filled the phone like a small, bright thing. "Mrs. Holloway, let me have the cereal with the little marshmallows." "Did you say thank you?" "I said it twice." "Mom, I finished my drawing, the one with the horse." "Yeah? Is it good?" "It's really good. It's a brown horse and it's running in a field and there's a rainbow, but like a real one, not a fake one." Clara tipped her face up toward the pale morning sun and closed her eyes. "A real rainbow, with all 7 colors. I looked them up. That's my girl." "Mom." Sophie's voice dropped slightly. That careful shift Clara had learned to recognize, the one that meant her daughter was reading a room. "Did you eat breakfast?" Clara opened her eyes. "I had coffee." "Mom, I'll eat at lunch, I promise. You always say that, and I always do it." A pause. Then Sophie said, with complete authority, "I believe you." Clara pressed the phone harder against her ear and looked at the empty parking lot. A woman who knows her worth changes the world. Her grandmother's voice, so clear it was almost physical. She'd said it in that same kitchen every time things got heavy. Clara had been 11 the first time she heard it, sitting at the table watching her grandmother iron a dress that didn't belong to them, earning 6 for a full morning's work. 23 days, Clara thought. She went back inside. The morning had slowed to a handful of tables. Donna was restocking the salt shakers, humming something under her breath. She always hummed when the rush was over, like a machine cooling down. Clara refilled the ketchup dispensers and thought about $391 and a $500 an hour lawyer and a judge who had probably never slept in room 7 of anywhere in his life. She thought about the $20 bill in her apron. She thought about "it doesn't make it right," said quietly, without performance, the way someone says something they simply believe. She didn't know his name. She didn't need to. But she found herself asking Donna anyway, just as she was passing with the coffee pot. "That guy who always sits at the counter. Jake, right? What's his deal?" Donna set the pot down. She looked at Clara for a moment, with something unreadable moving behind her eyes. "Jake Mercer," she said. "Rancher. About 4 miles out on Mercer Road. Lost his wife 3 years ago. Comes in every morning, barely talks. Tips like he means it." A pause. "Why?" "No reason," Clara said. Donna studied her 1 more second. Then she picked up the coffee pot and went back to work. Clara wiped down the counter where Jake had been sitting. There was a ring in the laminate, a faint impression worn into the surface from years of coffee cups in the same spot, the same pair of hands warming against the ceramic in the same way every morning. She ran her thumb along it. 23 days, she thought. And then whatever happens, happens. But for the first time in 8 months, something that wasn't fear sat in her chest. Small, unnamed, there. If you're feeling Clara's quiet kind of strength, the kind that doesn't shout, it just holds, leave a like and drop a comment. Have you ever been told you weren't worth anything by someone who turned out to be completely wrong? This story is just getting started. Clara was 3 days into a stretch of back-to-back doubles, 5 a.m. to 9 p.m., 16 hours on feet that were starting to protest the arrangement, when Richard walked into the Sundown Diner at 2:17 p.m. on a Tuesday. She saw him before he saw her. That gave her approximately 4 seconds to decide how to hold her face. He pushed through the door, wearing a charcoal blazer over a white button-down, pressed slacks, leather shoes that had no business being in Harlan, Texas. He stood in the entry with the particular posture of a man who believed every room he walked into owed him an accounting. Their eyes met across the diner. He smiled, the kind that doesn't reach the eyes. "There she is." Donna appeared at Clara's shoulder. "You want me to?" "No." Clara handed her the coffee pot. "I've got it." She walked to him. He'd taken booth 1, the best sightline facing the door. Richard was always strategic, even in a roadside diner with vinyl seats and a laminate countertop and a specials board with a handwritten O where the marker had bled. "You can't come to my workplace," she said. "I was in the area." He looked around the diner, a slow scan, taking inventory. His expression didn't change, but she knew what he was thinking. She'd watched him think it about 100 different things across 11 years of marriage. "This is less than you deserve, and look at you here anyway. Can you sit? I'm working. 2 minutes. I don't have 2 minutes. Clara," his voice dropped, patient, careful. The voice he used when he wanted her to understand that arguing was futile. "I drove 140 miles. She looked at him, really looked, for the first time in 8 months. He was still handsome in that precise, deliberate way. Dark hair touched with silver at the temples, clean nails, hands that had never touched an engine or a dish rack or a bathroom floor with a mop. She slid into the seat across from him. 2 minutes, she said. A manila envelope appeared on the table between them. She didn't touch it. "New documentation from Stephanie," he said. "Judge Callahan has a documented pattern of awarding primary custody to the parent with higher financial stability. That's a matter of public record." He paused. "I'm not your enemy, Clara. Stop saying that. I'm genuinely trying to make this easier. You drove 140 miles to the diner where I work to hand me legal documents. Stop calling it making things easier." A small muscle moved in his jaw. "Sophie deserves—" "Don't!" The word landed flat and hard, like a hand on a surface. "Don't tell me what Sophie deserves. I know what Sophie deserves. I've been doing it alone for 8 months on 9 does. 25 an hour, while you sent certified letters through a lawyer who costs more per hour than I make in 2 days. The booth was very quiet. From somewhere behind her, she heard the soft sound of a fork being set down. Someone was listening. She didn't look to see who. Richard looked at his hands. Something moved across his face, just for a second, just a flicker. "I miss her," he said quietly. "Sophie, I miss my daughter." Clara looked at him. For a moment, just a moment, something in her chest moved, the memory of who he'd been before. The version of him she'd married, who'd made her laugh in the parking lot of a grocery store at 11 p.m. over something stupid. That person, the ghost of him. "You should have thought about that," she said, "before you threw my things on the lawn." She slid out of the booth, picked up her order pad, and walked back to the floor. She didn't look at Donna. She didn't look at anything. She went to table 7, pulled out her pen, and asked the woman there, mid-40s, kind face, a young child coloring in the seat beside her, if she was ready to order. Her voice was completely steady. Her hands, beneath the order pad, were not. The bell above the door rang at 6:15 p.m. She didn't need to look up. "Evening, Donna," said the low voice. "Jake, thought you weren't coming in today. Changed my mind." The familiar sound of him settling onto his stool at the far end of the counter. The particular quality of stillness he brought into a room. Not silence exactly, more like a pause. Richard was still in booth 1. Clara moved to the coffee station, keeping her back at a neutral angle. She poured Jake's cup without being asked. Black, always black, and set it down without making eye contact. "Thank you," he said. "Sure." She turned to go. "Long day." She stopped. "All of them are," she said, and walked away. She felt Donna watching her from the pastry case and chose not to acknowledge it. Richard left at 6:40 after sitting in that booth for 23 minutes, drinking a $3.50 cup of coffee and a $4 slice of blueberry pie, and leaving a $4 tip on $7.50. He buttoned his blazer at the door. He looked across the diner. At Clara, at her back, at the faded uniform and the rubber band in her hair, and whatever he wanted her to give him across that distance, she didn't give it. He walked out. She let out a breath she'd been holding since 2:17 p.m. She went to clear his table. "He sat for 23 minutes, Jake said." She looked up. He was watching the parking lot window, not her. "That's not your business," she said. "No, it's not." He turned his coffee cup slowly in both hands. "I'm not making it mine." "Good." A pause. "You handled that well," he said. She picked up Richard's plate. "I didn't do anything." "That's what I mean." She looked at him. He was watching the window with the calm of a man who'd been watching things a long time. Livestock, weather, people. There was no performance in it, no effort to seem deep or perceptive. He was just watching and saying what he saw. "Do you always watch that much?" she asked. "Ranch work." He glanced at her, just briefly. "You learn to read things without being told. People tell you everything without saying a word." She put the plate in her bus bin. "What did I tell you?" "That you're tired," he said, "and that you won't admit it to anyone in this room." She left without answering. But something in her chest shifted, something small and uncomfortable and very much alive. Sophie called at 6:45 p.m. Mrs. Holloway had taken her to the library after school, and she had found a book about quarter horses, The Complete Guide to the American Quarter Horse. 312 pages, and she was reading passages aloud over the phone with the focused urgency of a child who has discovered a fact she considers urgent and possibly underappreciated by the adults in her life. "Did you know they can run 55 miles per hour? That's faster than a car on a 45-mile-per-hour road." "That's pretty fast," Clara agreed. She was carrying a bus bin toward the kitchen. She shifted the bin to one arm. "And they can feel when a person is sad, like actually feel it, through your hands when you touch them." Mrs. Holloway says that's true. Mrs. Holloway knows a lot of things. She says there are ranches around here that have them. Real ones. A pause, pregnant with intent. "Maybe we could see one sometime." Clara pushed open the kitchen door with her hip. The kitchen smelled like dish soap and fryer grease and the particular exhaustion of a long shift. She set the bin down beside the sink. "Maybe," she said. "I looked it up," Sophie continued, "on the library computer. There's one called the Mercer Ranch. It's on Mercer Road, which is like 4 miles away. Do you think they'd let us see the horses if we asked nicely?" Clara turned around slowly. "Where'd you see that?" she said. "It was in the county directory, the section about farms and stuff." A rustling sound, pages turning. "Jake Mercer, owner, 200 acres, quarter horses, it says 2 of them." 2. Clara looked through the order window at the counter. Jake was finishing his coffee. His hat was back on. He was folding a dollar bill into his jacket pocket, the change from his check. She looked at the order window for a long moment. "I'll see what I can do," she said to Sophie. At 8:55 p.m., 5 minutes before close, she brought Jake his check. He looked at it, reached for his wallet, and she said, before she could stop herself, "My daughter wants to see your horses." He looked up. "She's 7, Clara said. "She found the ranch in the county directory. She's been reading about quarter horses for 3 hours. She paused. "You mentioned it. Last time you gave me a ride. She'd remember it for years, that's all." He held the check in one hand and looked at her. She had the sudden, sharp feeling that she'd said too much, that she'd reached for something she had no right to, that she'd misread the gesture and the $20 bill and the "it doesn't make it right" and all the quiet watching. "Saturday morning," he said, 8 o'clock. "She can feed them apples if she wants." Clara looked at him. "Okay," she said. He paid, tipped well, put his hat on, and left. Donna appeared at her elbow before the door had finished swinging shut. "What was that about?" "Saturday," Clara said. She went to restock the sugar packets and said nothing else. But she was smiling, just slightly, just at the corner of her mouth, for the first time in longer than she could remember. She walked home in the cold at 9:15 p.m. February in the Texas hill country, 38 degrees, thin jacket, gravel shoulder of Route 9, dark except for the occasional pair of headlights passing in the other direction. She was thinking about Richard's face, that brief flicker she'd seen in the booth, the one that might have been grief. She was thinking about the manila envelope still sitting on the passenger seat of his rented car. She was thinking about Judge Callahan and financial stability and $391.44 in a savings account. She was also thinking, in spite of herself, about Saturday. Headlights slowed behind her, dark green pickup. It rolled to a stop. The window went down. Jake Mercer looked at her from the cab. No hat now. just his face in the warm light from the dashboard. "It's 38 degrees, he said. "I know. I'm going past the motor lodge." She stood in the cold for a moment, jacket too thin, feet aching from 16 hours, the motel still 3 miles away. She opened the passenger door and got in. The truck cab was warm. It smelled like saddle leather and cedar and coffee from a thermos that had been through a lot of mornings. A pair of worn work gloves sat on the dashboard, a folded Harlan County map in the door pocket, and in the back window a small drawing taped to the glass, a pencil sketch of a horse, simple, clearly done by a child's hand, the lines confident and careful at once. Clara looked at it. "My niece," Jake said, following her eyes. "She drew it a few years back. I just never moved it. It's good. She thought horses were the whole world." He pulled onto Route 9. "She's 17 now, more interested in other things." He said it with the particular fondness of someone watching something beautiful turn into something else beautiful. They drove in silence for a while. "Why does he want custody?" Jake asked. Clara looked out the window. The dark was total out here, the kind of dark you only get miles from a city. "Because he can," she said, "because he has the means to, and because I left. And when I left, I took the one thing he'd ever produced, that he was genuinely proud of." She paused. "He loves Sophie. I believe that. He just loves her the way he loves everything, like ownership." The truck was quiet for a moment. "My father was like that," Jake said. "Not mean, just couldn't see the difference between loving something and having it." He looked at the road. "He got better, eventually. Richard won't." "No," Jake said. "Probably not." She looked at him. She'd expected pushback or comfort, some version of, "Maybe you don't know that for sure," the kind of softening people did when the truth was uncomfortable. He hadn't softened it. She wasn't sure if that was the kindest or the most difficult thing someone had said to her in months. 22 days, she said. He nodded. They pulled into the sundown motor lodge. He stopped the truck. She opened the door, then stopped. "Thank you," she said, "for the ride, both times." "It's on the way." She got out, stood in the parking lot. He waited until she had her key out and the door to room 7 open before he pulled away. Inside, Sophie was asleep in her usual position, knees up, hand under her cheek, the green crayon on the nightstand. Clara sat on the edge of the mattress in the dark and looked at her daughter for a long time. 22 days. Something had changed. She couldn't name it exactly. It wasn't hope. Hope was too big, too fragile, too easy to drop. It was smaller than that, more specific. It was the feeling of being seen, of someone looking at the exact situation she was in and not flinching, not softening, not turning it into something more comfortable. Just seeing it, seeing her. She lay down beside Sophie without changing clothes and closed her eyes. For the first time in 8 months, she fell asleep before she finished counting. The ranch was 200 acres of red Texas earth, 3 weathered outbuildings, a fence that needed new paint along the north side, and a farmhouse with a wraparound porch facing west toward a cedar tree line that in the late morning light looked like it had been drawn by someone who knew exactly what they were doing. Sophie pressed her face against the passenger window of the Focus as Clara turned onto the gravel drive. "There are 2, Sophie said, with the reverence of someone verifying a long-held belief, just like it said. 2, Clara confirmed. "The brown one is probably Cooper." Clara looked at her. "How do you know his name?" "I called the ranch," Sophie said. "Yesterday. I asked Mrs. Holloway to help me look up the number. I wanted to know what I was dealing with." Clara stared at the road. "You called?" "I was polite," Sophie said. "He said their names were Cooper and Willa. Cooper is the brown one, 11 years old. Willa is the grey. She's faster, but she has opinions." She looked at her notebook. "I wrote it down." Clara pulled up beside the green pickup and turned off the engine. Ahead, Jake was coming from the direction of the barn, wiping his hands on a cloth. He saw the car, stopped, put the cloth in his back pocket and walked over. Sophie was already out of the car before Clara finished unbuckling. She stood in front of Jake and looked up at him with the frank assessment of someone who has done preliminary research and is now confirming their findings. "Which one's faster today?" she asked. "Cooper or Willa?" Something in Jake's face shifted, some careful habitual reserve loosening around the edges. "Depends on the mood," he said. "You want to find out?" "Yes," said Sophie. Sophie fed Cooper apple slices with her palm flat and her fingers pressed together, the way Jake had shown her. "Horses feel your heartbeat through your hands. They want to know if you're calm." And she stood completely still while the horse ate, her face composed with the concentration of a surgeon. Clara stood a few feet back and watched. There was something about seeing Sophie still, genuinely still, not holding herself in check, not waiting for the adult in the room to decide what came next, that moved through Clara's chest like a slow tide. She couldn't name it exactly. She just stood with her arms folded loosely around herself and watched her daughter breathe with a horse in a Texas morning. "She's good with him," Jake said quietly. He'd come to stand beside her while Cooper ate, leaving Sophie to it. "Some kids make them nervous. She doesn't. She's good with most things," Clara said. "Better than me, honestly." He glanced at her. "She gets it from somewhere," he said. The kitchen had wood floors that creaked in a comfortable way, a table that had clearly been built by hand, the joints showing the particular craftsmanship of someone who didn't rush, and a cast-iron pan on the stove that looked like it had been used every morning for 30 years. A row of hooks by the back door held 3 jackets, 2 hats, and a single blue ribbon, a first-place ribbon from what looked like a county fair, faded at the edges. Clara noticed a framed photograph on the windowsill above the sink, a woman, dark hair, laughing at something just outside the frame. The photo was slightly angled, like it had been moved once and never quite put back straight. She didn't ask. Jake made coffee. Real coffee, not the burnt version from the diner, ground fresh and pressed in a metal French press that had seen a lot of use. He poured it into 2 mugs and set them on the table while Sophie watched the horses from the fence, having negotiated permission to stand on the bottom rung as long as she didn't climb higher. "You've had the ranch long?" Clara asked. "My grandfather built it in 1951. My father took it over, then me." He wrapped both hands around his mug, the same gesture she'd noticed at the diner counter, warming his palms against the ceramic, even when the room wasn't cold. "My wife and I were going to expand the south pasture, add a second barn." He paused, set his mug down. "Didn't get to it. I'm sorry," Clara said. He nodded, no deflection in it. Just acknowledgement, the acceptance of a true thing. What was her name? Ruth. He looked toward the window. School teacher, 3rd grade, 15 years. She could take a child who'd given up on reading and have them devouring books in 2 weeks. I never fully understood the mechanism. A small internal smile, aimed at some memory she couldn't see. "She said you just had to find the right door. Every kid had one. You just had to try enough handles." Clara looked at her coffee. "Sophie's teacher says she's been drawing constantly," she said. "Houses, mostly, and horses. She checks books out of the library. She told me." He looked toward the fence. "She gave me a full description of the property she's designing. Porch, tire swing, brown dog with a white spot. She was very specific about the white spot's placement. Left shoulder, slightly irregular." Clara laughed, surprised. "She called you?" She was thorough. A pause. "She mentioned you're in the drawing. On the porch, in a chair, drinking something warm." "She told me about the chair," Clara said. "There's a figure on the porch she said she was still deciding about." He looked at his mug. "I didn't ask." The kitchen held a particular kind of quiet, the kind that exists in houses where people have had real conversations, where the walls have absorbed a certain amount of human honesty over the years. Clara looked at her coffee. "He's taking me to court for Sophie," she said. She hadn't planned to say it. It just arrived. "My ex. He has a very good lawyer and a house with 4 bedrooms and a documented income of $240,000 a year, and I have $391 and a scheduling manager who just cut my hours." She paused. I'm not asking you for anything. I don't know why I said that. Because it's true, Jake said, and you're used to not being able to say it. She looked at him. He was looking at his mug, calm, not fixing, not offering solutions or reassurances or the particular variety of pity that lands like a stone. When I took over this ranch, he said slowly, after my father, I had $800 and a tractor that seized up in the first week. 200 acres of land I'd watched other people work my whole life, but had never run myself. He turned the mug once. My father used to say, "A woman who knows her worth changes the world." He said it specifically about women, said men were slower to understand it, took longer to see the thing right in front of them. Clara sat very still. Something in those words, the exact arrangement of them, sat in her chest wrong. Not wrong like incorrect, wrong like a key in a lock that shouldn't fit, but does. Her grandmother had said something like that, almost exactly like that. She'd said it in a kitchen, over an ironing board, when Clara was 11 years old, and the world was hard for different reasons. She didn't say so. She held it, turned it over, and set it somewhere she could look at later. "I don't know what I'm worth right now," she said honestly. "Some days I think I do. Some days I'm just counting." "What are you counting?" "Days, dollars, hours." He was quiet for a moment. "What would you count if those things weren't the problem?" he asked. She thought about it. "My daughter," she said. "Just her." He picked up his mug. "Then you already know," he said. "You just can't see it from inside the problem." Sophie came in at 11:30, cheeks red from the February air, smelling like cold wind and horse. She sat at the kitchen table with the total comfort of a child who hasn't learned yet to be cautious in unfamiliar spaces, accepted the juice Jake set in front of her with a solemn thank you, and immediately looked at the photograph on the windowsill. "Who is that?" "That was my wife," Jake said. "Ruth was. She died a few years ago." Sophie considered this with the frank seriousness children apply to death before they've been taught to step around it. "Were you sad?" "Very," Jake said. "Are you still?" "Sophie," Clara said gently. "It's okay." Jake looked at Sophie directly. "Yes, but it's different now. Less like a hole, more like—" he thought about it. "More like a room you don't go into every day, but it's still there." Sophie nodded slowly. She was looking at the photograph. "My mom has a room like that," she said. Clara looked at her daughter. "She doesn't go in," Sophie said, glancing at Jake with the particular trust of a child who has decided someone is safe. "But sometimes I can see when she's standing near the door. She gets this look, like she's remembering something heavy." The kitchen was completely quiet. Outside, Cooper shifted his weight by the fence, and the sound traveled through the window glass. Jake looked at Clara. Clara looked at her daughter. "Sophie, I'm just saying." Sophie drank her juice. "She's okay, though. She's the toughest person I know. She just needs someone to tell her sometimes." She set her glass down with finality, because she doesn't believe it when she says it to herself. They left at 1:30 p.m. Jake walked them out. Sophie climbed into the back seat and immediately opened her notebook. At the car, Clara stopped and looked at him. "Thank you," she said. "This was—" She gestured vaguely at the barn and the horses and the kitchen and all of it. "She needed this, and I think I did too." He opened her car door, not with ceremony, just naturally, as if the thought of not doing it hadn't occurred to him. She got in. He leaned on the doorframe for a moment, looking at the windshield, not at her. "That hearing," he said, 21 days now. 21 days. "Do you have anyone to sit with you?" She looked at the steering wheel. "Mrs. Holloway offered." He nodded. "If you need another person," he said, "the offer is open." He straightened up, gave the door a small push, stepped back. Clara started the car. She backed out slowly, gravel crunching under the tires. "Mom," Sophie said from the back seat, without looking up from her notebook. "Yeah, I decided." "About what?" "The drawing." She held it up. There was the porch, the chair with Clara in it, something warm in her hands, the tire swing, the brown dog with the irregular white spot, the rainbow horse in the field. And on the porch, standing, a new figure, added in the last 10 minutes, tall with a hat. "Sophie," Clara said carefully. "I'm just drawing what feels right," Sophie said, with the serenity of someone who has done the math and is comfortable with the answer. She went back to her sketching. Clara looked in the rearview mirror. Jake was still in the driveway watching them go. He raised his hand, not quite a wave, just an acknowledgement, quiet and certain. "I see you." Clara turned onto the road. The cedar trees went past. The red earth, the wide, pale sky. 21 days, she thought. Something in her chest that had been shut for a long, long time shifted open, just a crack. Just enough for a thin line of warmth to get through. It wasn't hope. It was something earlier than hope. Something that comes before you let yourself hope. The acknowledgement that something good might exist, and you might be allowed to want it. She drove toward town. She didn't say another word about the drawing. But she didn't ask Sophie to change it either. Monday morning, 7:40 a.m., Clara arrived at the diner to find Greg Sutton's car parked at an angle she'd come to recognize as organizational anxiety. He was at his desk when she came through the back. "Sit down," he said. She sat. He had a folder open in front of him. He looked at it and not at her, which was the tell she'd learned to read. Greg made eye contact when he was delivering information. He avoided it when he'd already made a decision. "Corporate did a review," he said. "Labor costs. We're trimming the schedule across all 3 locations. Effective next week, I can only offer you 20 hours. She heard the number, then she heard it again. "Greg, I was already at 28 and I can barely—" "I understand." "You don't understand. I have a custody hearing in 17 days. My lawyer—" She stopped. She didn't have a lawyer. She'd had a consultation with a man named Dale Hofstadter, who'd looked at her case and said politely that going up against a Stephanie Reyes filing without representation was, quote, "not a thing I'd recommend." His retainer was $2,500. "I need the hours, Clara." His voice was not unkind. That was the worst part. "I have 5 people in this situation. I have a budget number, and my hands are tied." He closed the folder. "I can give you the Saturday morning shift as an add-on. That would bring you to 24. 24 hours at $9.25. She did the math in under a second. $220 a week before taxes. She stood up, smoothed her apron, looked at the narrow window above his desk, the same pale, flat sky. "Okay," she said. She walked out. She did not shake in the hallway. She went straight to the floor, picked up the coffee pot, and started the morning. She called Jake from the parking lot at 9 a.m. She'd been going to call Mrs. Holloway. She wasn't sure exactly when she'd changed her mind. He picked up on the second ring. "They cut my hours," she said. "I'm at 24 now. My hearing is in 17 days. And Richard's lawyer submitted something new to the court last week, and I don't know what it says because I can't afford someone to read it for me, and—" She stopped, pressed her free hand flat against the concrete wall of the diner. "I don't know why I'm telling you this." A pause on his end. "Because you needed to say it out loud," he said, "to someone who wouldn't make it worse." She closed her eyes. "There's a legal aid office in Fredericksburg," he said, "open Tuesdays and Thursdays. I know the woman who runs it. Her name is Patrice Okafor. She's dealt with custody cases. I can't take charity, Jake. It's not charity. It's what the office exists for. She helped 3 families in this county in the last 2 years. A beat. I can drive you Thursday." She stood in the parking lot for a moment in the cold. "I can drive myself," she said. "I know you can," he said. "The offer is open." She looked at the pale sky. "Okay," she said. "Thursday." Richard called at noon. "I heard about the hours," he said. She went cold. "How did you—" "Harlan is a small town, you know that." No, Donna wouldn't. She ran through faces and came up empty. Or maybe no one. Maybe he had someone watching. She wouldn't put it past Stephanie Reyes, who filed paperwork the way other people sent messages. "It's a setback," she said, keeping her voice flat. "Clara, patient, careful. This changes the financial picture significantly. Callahan looks at income stability. You go in there with 24 hours and no legal counsel. You're not fighting a case. You're surrendering on a delay." A pause. "Stephanie is filing an emergency motion to modify. It means the hearing could expand. More documentation, more time." What does that mean? It means this gets harder. Unless I sign. Silence. Unless you make a rational decision, he said. She looked at the parking lot, at the crack in the asphalt that ran from the drain cover all the way to the edge of the property. She'd been looking at that crack every morning for 8 months, tracing it like a sentence. Sophie drew me a picture last week, she said. Clara, she drew us a house. With a porch and a tire swing and a dog with a white spot on the wrong shoulder, she drew me in a chair on the porch. She was very specific about the chair. She paused. She's been carrying this whole future around in her head for 7 years, and she draws it in notebooks and takes it with her everywhere. I am not signing anything. She hung up. Her hand was shaking. She went back inside. Thursday came grey and cold, with a low ceiling of clouds that turned the hill country into a pewter sketch of itself. Jake's truck was in the motor lodge lot at 8 a.m. Clara had told Sophie she had an errand. Mrs. Holloway, who was discreet in the way of women who have seen a lot of life and chosen wisdom over gossip, took Sophie for French toast at the diner and asked no questions. They drove to Fredericksburg, mostly in silence. Jake with the road, Clara with the folder she'd assembled, pay stubs, rental agreement, Sophie's school records, the unsigned voluntary relinquishment document she'd been staring at for 3 weeks. Patrice Okafor was 50, wore reading glasses on a beaded chain, and had the efficient warmth of someone who has no time for ceremony but genuine interest in the humans in front of her. She read Clara's documents at the speed of someone who'd read 10,000 like them, asked 6 specific questions, and wrote notes in a tiny, precise hand. He's going for primary custody, she said. Not full termination, that matters. It means visitation is the flaw. You won't lose her completely no matter what. She took off her glasses. But primary is still a significant loss. You'd be the weekend parent. Clara looked at her folder. What are my options? Listen, we file a response to the emergency motion. Today, if possible. Patrice picked up a legal pad. We document your consistency. School pickups, medical appointments, teacher contact. We establish that financial difficulty is not parental neglect. That's the key distinction in Texas family law. She leaned forward slightly. And I need character witnesses. People who've seen you parent, bosses, teachers, neighbors, anyone who'll stand up. Clara nodded slowly. On the drive back, the clouds had started to break up. Thin light came through the gaps in pale gold lines across the road. She thinks I have a real shot, Clara said. You do, Jake said. She looked at him. How can you say that when you don't know how it's going to go? He was quiet for a moment. Because I've watched you, he said. For 2 months, almost every morning. I've watched you come in early and leave late and never complain. I've watched you take 2 $50 tips and say nothing and keep moving. I've watched you answer the phone from a man who makes you shake and come back to the floor in 30 seconds with your voice steady. He looked at the road. That's the kind of person a judge should see. She looked at her hands in her lap. I'll be a witness, he said. If you need one. She said nothing. Clara, I heard you. They drove the rest of the way in a quiet that held something neither of them was ready to name yet, but neither of them was pulling away from either. The trouble arrived on Saturday. It arrived in the form of a black BMW 5 Series pulling into the Sundown Diner lot at 7:45 a.m. and a woman named Diana Holt stepping out. Clara recognized her. Richard's sister. She had his bone structure and none of his restraint. Diana sat at the counter, Jake's stool specifically, which he hadn't yet arrived to occupy, and looked around the diner with the appraisal of someone inspecting a property for demolition. Clara brought her coffee without being asked. Thank you, Clara. No warmth. No hostility. Precision. I'm going to say what I came to say because I don't have a lot of time, and I think you'll appreciate directness. She wrapped her hands around the mug. Richard is not doing this to punish you. Whatever you believe, whatever story you've constructed, he's doing this because Sophie called him 3 weeks ago and told him she'd been sleeping at a motor lodge and eating cereal for dinner 2 nights in a row. Clara went very still. She called him, Diana said. 12 minutes. She didn't tell you because she didn't want to upset you. A pause. He's worried. That's it. Just worried. She ate cereal twice because I worked late and I'm not accusing you, I'm explaining. Diana's hands curved around the coffee mug. He's not the same man he was 3 years ago. I know that doesn't undo anything, but the hearing let him have more time with her, shared custody. A real arrangement, not a war. She pushed a card across the counter. Think about it. The bell above the door rang at 6:15 a.m., except it was 8:10 now. Jake walked in, stopped. He looked at Diana, then at Clara, then at the space between them. He read it the way he read everything, completely without needing to be told. He sat down, 3 stools away, not at his usual spot. Donna set his coffee down without a word. Diana left 10 minutes later. Clara collected her mug, held it for a moment. Sophie had called Richard. She sat with that for the rest of the shift, turning it over, trying to understand the shape of it, not betrayal. She knew that. Sophie was 7 years old, and she'd been worried, and she'd done the thing a child does when she's worried. She'd reached for a parent, both parents, and Clara hadn't been the one she'd called. At close, she turned off the lights over the counter and stood in the dark for a minute. She still chose you, Donna said from the back. Clara turned. Donna was untying her apron. The drawing, the house, the chair on the porch. She hung her apron on the hook. She still chose you. Clara looked at the dark floor. 13 days, she said. 13 days, Donna said. Go home. The Harlan County Family Court building was beige and flat, and looked like it had been designed by someone who believed that justice should not be comfortable. Clara arrived at 8:30 a.m. for a 9 hearing. She wore the grey blazer she'd bought at Goodwill 3 years ago for a job interview she hadn't gotten. It still fit. Patrice had told her to wear something that said capable, not defeated. She'd looked at it for a long time that morning in the mirror and decided that was the same thing as here and not giving up, which was the only look she had. Sophie was at school. She'd kissed her daughter at 7:45, and Sophie had taken her face in both hands the way she sometimes did, very seriously, like she was checking a map, and said, "You're the best person I know. Tell the judge." Mrs. Holloway had driven Clara to the courthouse. She was waiting in the lobby in a blue cardigan she'd pressed the night before, which Clara had seen her do from across the parking lot. Patrice was already inside. Richard was already there too, with Stephanie Reyes, who wore a slate blazer and the kind of focused calm that $500 an hour buys. He looked at Clara from across the hallway for a moment. He nodded. She nodded back. Then the doors opened. The hearing had been going for 47 minutes when Stephanie Reyes introduced the motel receipts. 8 months of receipts from the Sundown Motor Lodge. Room 7, $42 a night. She laid them on the plaintiff's table with the exact care of someone constructing a structure they believed was load-bearing. Ms. Watts has been residing with her minor daughter in a single-room motor lodge unit since June of last year, Stephanie said. Her voice was even, professional, and very, very clear. The unit has no kitchen facilities, no yard, and is located 13 miles from Ms. Watts's place of employment, which she walks to and from, including at night. She paused. We are not suggesting Ms. Watts is neglectful. We are suggesting that the circumstances she is providing for Sophie are not sufficient for a child of 7 to thrive. Clara kept her hands flat on the table. Patrice objected on grounds. Judge Callahan, grey-haired, mid-60s, with the face of someone who had heard thousands of impossible things and needed to be convinced rather than moved, sustained in part and overruled in part. Callahan looked at Clara. Ms. Watts, do you wish to respond? She looked at Patrice. Patrice nodded almost imperceptibly. Clara stood up. Her voice, when it came, was steady. Judge Callahan, she said, my daughter lives in room 7 of the Sundown Motor Lodge. That's true. There's no kitchen and there's no yard. The sheets get washed twice a week by a woman named Mrs. Holloway, who checks on Sophie in the mornings and taught her the names of Texas wildflowers and helped her find a book about quarter horses. She paused. Room 7 has a window that faces east, And every morning in the winter when I leave for work at 5:10 a.m., the sky through that window is the color of something almost beautiful. Sophie draws it sometimes. The courtroom was very quiet. Across the room, Richard's hands were folded on the table. I chose the motor lodge because it was $42 a night, and I needed everything else I had for food and school supplies and the reading glasses Sophie needed in October that cost $67 at the Walgreens. I make $9.25 an hour. I walk to work at 5:10 a.m. in February because the alternative is a car repair I can't afford. And if I miss a shift, I lose ground I can't get back. She looked at the judge. None of that has anything to do with how much I love my daughter, or how good I am at being her mother, and I need you to understand that those are two separate things. She sat down. The courtroom held its breath for a moment. Then Stephanie said, "Judge Callahan, with respect, emotional testimony doesn't—" The back doors of the courtroom opened. Clara turned. Jake Mercer walked in. He was wearing his good flannel, the dark one she'd never seen, charcoal grey with the sleeves pressed, and clean boots and no hat, and he walked to the front of the room with the even, unhurried pace of a man who knew exactly where he was going and why. "Your Honor," he stopped at the gate. "My name is Jake Mercer. I own the Mercer Ranch on Route 9. I've known Clara Watts for 2 months. I'd like to speak." Callahan looked at him, then at the room. "You're not on the witness list." "No, sir. I drove here anyway." He put his hands in his pockets. "I know that may be a problem. I'm here in case it isn't." A long pause. Stephanie was already on her feet. "Your Honor, opposing counsel has not had the opportunity to—" "Mr. Mercer." Callahan looked at him over his glasses. "What could you possibly add to these proceedings?" Jake stood in the aisle of a courthouse in a country that had never asked him to prove anything before, and looked at the judge and said, without performance and without hesitation, "I can tell you what I've seen." Callahan considered him for a long moment. "You have 5 minutes," he said. "Sit down, Ms. Reyes." Jake didn't embellish. He spoke the way he watched things, directly and without waste. He described the morning routine he'd observed for 2 months, the consistency, the way Clara spoke to Sophie on the phone on her break, always at 9, always asking about school first. The way Sophie talked about her mother, not with the careful, measured language of a child, trained to say good things, but with the unself-conscious pride of a child who has never considered that the person she's describing might not be exceptional. He described Saturday at the ranch. "Sophie fed my horses," he said. "She was nervous, and she kept her hand flat and her heartbeat even because she'd researched how to do it correctly. She's 7 years old. She made 6 phone calls to prepare for a morning visit to a ranch she'd looked up in a county directory." He paused. "She learned that from someone. And then she drew a picture, and she put her mother in it, on the porch, in the best seat, with something warm in her hands. A beet. That's not a child in crisis. That's a child who's safe." The courtroom was completely still. Clara was looking at the table in front of her. She wasn't going to cry. She'd told herself she wasn't going to cry. "She's not struggling," Jake said, "because her mother failed her. She's in a motor lodge because her mother chose survival. Those are different things, and the woman sitting at that table knows what her daughter needs better than any income statement can tell you." He sat down. The silence in the room went on for a long time. Richard was looking at his hands, not at Stephanie, not at the papers, at his own hands. Callahan took his glasses off, cleaned them, put them back on. "We'll take a 15-minute recess," he said. Clara found Jake in the hallway. She stood in front of him and looked at him, and he looked back at her with the same calm he always brought, but closer now and more present, and there was nothing between them except the fact of what he'd just done. "You didn't have to," she said. "I wanted to." "Jake." "Clara." He said her name like it was the whole sentence. Like everything he'd meant to say was in the one syllable. I know this isn't—" He stopped, took a breath. "I've been watching you for 2 months without saying what I was watching for, what I was hoping for." He looked at his boots for exactly 1 second, then back at her. "I'm not good at this." Ruth used to say I communicated like a fence post, one direction, no variation. Something moved across his face. But I needed to be in there. I needed you to know that someone was in there, that someone was in your corner who didn't have something to gain from it. She looked at him. She thought about the crack in the parking lot. The $20 bill. It doesn't make it right. The kitchen with the good coffee and the photograph at a slight angle and the first place ribbon faded at the edges. The 2 months of 6:15 a.m. and 2 hands warming around a cup. She thought about the drawing. The figure on the porch, the one Sophie had added at the last minute. She reached up. She put her hand on his jaw, calloused palm, rough against rough, and she looked at him and said very quietly, "Thank you for being someone I didn't have to explain things to." He covered her hand with his. He didn't say anything. He didn't need to. From the end of the hallway, Patrice appeared. "They're ready for us." Clara dropped her hand, turned, straightened her blazer. She walked back toward the courtroom doors. At the door, she stopped. "My grandmother," she said, not turning around. "She used to say a thing. When I was 11, every time things got heavy." She paused. She said, "A woman who knows her worth changes the world." She looked back at him. "Where did your father get that phrase, Jake?" He stood very still. "I don't know," he said. "He always said he heard it from a woman who worked for his family a long time ago. Said it was the truest thing anyone ever told him." Clara looked at him. Something enormous and quiet settled in the center of her chest. "What was her name?" she whispered. "I never knew," he said. He just called her by her first name, Dottie. Her grandmother's name was Dorothy. Everyone had called her Dottie. The door swung open. Clara walked in. Callahan read his decision at 11:47 a.m. Joint legal custody. Primary residence with Clara pending a 6-month review. Richard, 3 weekends per month and 2 weeks in summer. Structured transitions. Clara sat with her hands in her lap and heard the words arrive one at a time, like stones being set. Primary, residence, Clara. Patrice squeezed her arm. Across the room, Richard was nodding at something Stephanie said. He looked up. He looked at Clara, not with the measuring assessment she'd expected, but with something older and quieter beneath it, something she hadn't seen in years. He mouthed something. She almost didn't catch it. "I'm sorry." She held that, turned it over. She nodded. Not forgiveness, not absolution, just acknowledgement. A true thing received without pretense. Then she stood up and walked out into the hallway and exhaled. Sophie was in the 3rd grade classroom when Clara came through the door at 2:15 p.m. The teacher, Ms. Breen, 29, the kind of tired that comes from caring intensely, looked up and understood from Clara's face that something significant had happened and stepped quietly to the side to let them have the corner. Sophie stood up from her desk, looked at her mother. "Well?" she said. Her chin was up. "Primary," Clara said. "You stay with me." Sophie sat back down. She did it slowly, deliberately, the way someone sits down when their legs stop working because the adrenaline has left the building. She put her elbows on her desk and her face in her hands, and she sat there for a moment in absolute silence. Then she made a small sound. Clara was across the room and kneeling beside the desk in 3 steps. She wrapped her arms around her daughter, small shoulders, brown hair, cedar pencil smell, the warm solidness of a child who still fits against you completely, and Sophie pressed her face into Clara's shoulder and didn't say anything for a long time. Ms. Breen was looking at her desk. Clara held her daughter in a 3rd grade classroom on a February Thursday and closed her eyes. "This," she thought, "this is what I was counting." Mrs. Holloway made chili. She didn't ask how it went. She just had a pot on the stove when they got back to the motor lodge, and cornbread wrapped in a dish towel, and 3 bowls set out on the little table in her office because room 7 didn't have room for more than 2. Sophie ate 2 bowls and told Mrs. Holloway the complete procedural history of the hearing, including a fairly accurate approximation of Stephanie Reyes's objections, delivered in a voice that suggested she found them unpersuasive. Mrs. Holloway listened with the full attention of someone who understood that being told things was a form of love. At 7:30 p.m., and Sophie fell asleep in the office chair with her coat still on. Clara and Mrs. Holloway looked at her. "I'm going to find us a real apartment," Clara said quietly. Mrs. Holloway handed her a sheet of paper. A listing. 2-bedroom, $750 a month, 3 blocks from Sophie's school, circled in red pen. "I found it last week," Mrs. Holloway said. "When you told me about the hearing," she paused. "I know the landlord. He'll work with first and last if you need time." Clara looked at the listing. "I can't." "You can. You will." Mrs. Holloway collected the bowls. "That's what you do." Jake's truck was in the motor lodge lot when Clara came out at 8:10 p.m. He was leaning against the passenger side, with his arms crossed and his hat off, looking at the sky. The night was clear and cold and full of stars, in the particular way the Texas hill country gets in winter, when the air is dry and everything is sharp. She walked over. "I was going to call," she said. "I know. I was in the neighborhood." She looked at him. "You're 4 miles away," she said. "That's nearby." He turned to face her. The starlight was enough to see his expression, careful, open, hoping. He had the specific vulnerability of a man who does not ask for things often and is not entirely sure of the protocol. "How'd it go?" "Primary custody," she said. "Sophie stays with me." Something in him released. She saw it move through his shoulders before it reached his face. "Good," he said. "Just that." She stood in the cold motor lodge parking lot and looked at him for a moment. "Jake," she said. "My grandmother was Dorothy Watts." "Dottie." She did domestic work for a ranching family in Fredericksburg County from 1959 to 1971. The family's name was Mercer. He went completely still. "She worked for my grandfather," he said slowly. "She was there when my father was born." He looked at her. "She's the woman he always talked about. He said she was the wisest person he ever met. He said she taught him everything he knew about how to treat people." "She taught me too," Clara said, "in a kitchen, when I was 11. The night was quiet around them. A car passed on Route 9, its headlights briefly illuminating the mesquite at the lot's edge, before everything went back to dark. They looked at each other. "She said it to your father," Clara said, "and he said it to you, and you said it to me, and she said it to me, and I've been saying it to myself for 25 years without knowing where else it had gone." Jake reached into his jacket. He held out his hand. In his palm was a small object, a river stone, smooth and flat and grey, with a faint line of white quartz through the center. She recognized it. It had been on the windowsill of the farmhouse kitchen, beside Ruth's photograph, barely visible. "My grandfather gave this to Dottie when she left," he said. "She left it behind. He kept it on that windowsill until he died. I never knew why." He looked at it in his hand. "I think now maybe I do." Clara looked at the stone. Her grandmother had always talked about a river stone, a smooth one with a white line. She described it once, late evening, kitchen light, and said it had been given to her by a good man, and she'd given it back, because some things belong where they're tended. "She said she gave it back," Clara whispered. "She said that?" Clara looked up at him. "She said some things belong where they're tended," she said. He looked at her for a long moment. Then he took her hand, turned it over, set the stone in her palm, small and cool and solid and impossibly present. She closed her fingers around it. Across 60 years, across a domestic kitchen and a county directory and a diner on Route 9 and a courthouse in February and 2 hands warming against a mug in the same way every morning, across all of it, something had come full circle, not a coincidence. Something more like a compass needle finally pointing toward true north after a long time of wandering. She looked down at the stone. She felt him watching her. The same quality of attention she'd noticed on the first morning at the counter, the kind that didn't demand anything. "What happens now?" she asked. He was quiet for a moment. "That's up to you," he said. "I'm in no hurry." He looked at the sky. "I've got a south pasture that needs a second barn. I've got 2 horses with opinions. I've got a kitchen with a French press and a table someone built by hand." He paused, And I've got a standing offer to let a 7-year-old visit any Saturday she wants. Clara looked up at him. She'll come every Saturday, she said. You know that. Good. He looked at her. She can bring her mother. She laughed, really laughed, surprised, the sound rising into the cold, clear air above the parking lot. He smiled. The full kind, the one that used the lines at the corners of his eyes. She hadn't seen it before, and it was better than she'd imagined. She opened her hand. The stone was warm now. She held it up, let the starlight catch the white quartz line running through the grey. My grandmother used to say, she started. I know, he said. I know what she used to say. Say it with me, she said. He looked at her. And in the parking lot of the Sundown Motor Lodge on a cold February night, they said it together, softly, like a thing being returned to where it started. A woman who knows her worth changes the world. Inside room 7, Sophie's green crayon was on the nightstand. On the back seat of Mrs. Holloway's car was a notebook, open to a drawing. A porch, a tire swing, a brown dog with an irregular white spot on the left shoulder, a rainbow horse in the field. And on the porch, 2 chairs now, side by side, with something warm in each set of hands. Sophie had added the second chair sometime after Saturday. She hadn't said anything about it. She was 7 years old, and she already knew what the adults were still figuring out. She'd just been waiting for them to catch up.